Halfway through, Can't Help Falling in Love, Elvis spotted him. An old miner in the front row, weathered face under a dusty cap, holding something wrapped in brown paper. The king paused, mid-verse. The crowd fell silent, waiting for what came next. This is the story of a gift, a pause, and a moment that's still talked about decades later. If you love real acts of kindness on stage, you'll want to hear every second. The spotlight swept across a sea of waving hands, then stopped. A worn denim cap, a weathered face, two hands gripping a package wrapped in brown paper. It was June 1977, Rapid City, South Dakota. The Civic Center pulsed with the low hum of 9,000. Voices waiting for Elvis Presley. The smell of popcorn and cigarette smoke hung in the rafters. You could hear the faint buzz of the amps behind the curtain. When the band launched into the opening bars, the arena exploded. Flashbulbs popped like tiny fireworks. Elvis stepped into the light white jumpsuit, catching every reflection, collar sharp, scarf draped at the ready. He moved through the first verse, eyes scanning the crowd. That's when he saw him, front row, alone. The man didn't move with the music. No clapping, no cheering, just that steady gaze fixed on the stage. His jacket was the kind of heavy canvas you wear in cold shafts underground. The sleeves were faded at the elbows, cuffs worn smooth from years of brushing against rock. The package in his lap was no bigger than a shoebox. Brown paper creased at the corners, tied with twine. He held it like it could break. People in nearby seats whispered. A woman in a red sweater leaned to her husband and said, "That's Bill from Deadwood, used to work the Homestake mine." Her husband nodded, eyes never leaving the stage. Elvis didn't rush the song, but his glance kept drifting back to that man in the cap, like he knew there was something more there. And the miner, he just waited, his fingers slowly flexing on the package. The third chorus hit. Elvis's steps toward the edge of the stage grew deliberate. The crowd's cheers dimmed into a low, rolling wave. A security guard leaned forward, watching the man closely. The miner looked up into the lights. For a moment, the glare lit the deep lines across his face. Lines carved by time and the weight of rock above him for decades. Elvis took 3 more steps, now directly in front of him. He held the mic low, his voice smooth, steady still filled the room, but his eyes were locked on the man. And then he shifted his weight forward, almost like he might step off the stage. In that instant, the music didn't matter. Not to Elvis, not to the miner, not to anyone in the Civic Center, because every soul in that room felt something was about to happen and no one knew what. Mid-verse, Elvis raised his left hand. The band froze. Brass, still in mid-breath, the drums hanging in the air. The silence hit like a wave. You could hear the squeak of a chair somewhere in the balcony, a cough from the back row. The miner looked up, surprised. The spotlight stayed on him, dust motes drifting through the beam. Elvis brought the mic close, his voice steady but warm. "Sir, is that for me?" The question seemed to hang in the space between them. The old man stood, slow and deliberate, knees stiff from decades in the mines. The brown paper package stayed cradled in his hands. As he stepped into the aisle, his work boots scraped against the concrete floor. People leaned back to give him room. Elvis didn't move from his spot. He just waited, one hand gripping the mic stand, the other extended slightly, palm open. The miner reached the edge of the stage. Security instinctively stepped forward, but Elvis gave a quick shake of his head. "It's all right," he said, without breaking eye contact. The man held the package up. Elvis leaned down, his fingers brushing against the miner's as he took it. It was heavier than he expected, the paper sagging around something solid inside. He didn't open it, not yet. Instead, he leaned in closer, his voice dropping low enough that the front row had to strain to hear. "Where you from?" The miner's voice was gravelo, rough, carrying the echo of underground tunnels. Deadwood. The name alone carried a history. Old gold rush town. Long shifts, dangerous work. Elvis nodded slowly, almost like he knew the weight behind the word. Some in the crowd started to murmur, "Why Deadwood?" What was in the package? Cameras flashed again, catching Elvis's face in a rare stillness. He straightened, holding the package against his hip. Then he looked out over the sea of faces, his voice booming through the arena. "Ladies and gentlemen, you're about to see something special." The crowd erupted, but in a different way. Now less frenzy, more anticipation. They leaned forward. A few stood on their seats. Elvis turned back to the miner. "Stay right there," he said. And then, softly, almost to himself, "I want you close for this." The bandleader looked at him, waiting for a cue. Elvis just smiled faintly, still holding that unopened package. Some say that in that moment, the miner's eyes glistened not from the lights, but from something deeper. A lifetime of work and dust and noise, suddenly replaced with a moment of quiet recognition. The air in the civic center had shifted. No one was checking programs or adjusting jackets anymore. Every single person was watching this exchange, aware. They were witnessing something rare. Elvis looked down at the package, thumb running along the twine. "Let's show them," he said. And with that, he began to pull the knot loose. The knot came free. The paper crackled as Elvis peeled it back. Every whisper in the arena stopped. Inside was stone rough, jagged, and shimmering under the spotlight. A chunk of gold, or heavy enough that Elvis adjusted his grip. Tiny flecks caught the light and flashed across his white jumpsuit. The crowd let out a gasp, the kind that rolls through people before they realize they've made a sound. Elvis tilted the mic toward the man in the cap. "What is this?" The miner stepped closer, his voice carrying just enough for the front rows. "From my last shift, before I hung up my helmet for good. Figured the king should have it." A murmur swept the arena. People shifted, drawn in. Elvis glanced down at the ore again, the corners of his mouth tightening. For a moment, he didn't say a word. Then he set the gold carefully on a black stage monitor, almost like it was fragile. His hands went to the scarf around his neck, white silk, edges swaying with his movement in one smooth motion. He leaned down from the stage, draping the scarf over the miner's shoulders. "So you remember this night," Elvis said. The scarf's fabric stood out stark against the miner's faded jacket. The crowd erupted. Whistles, applause, a few shouts of "TCB baby" from the back rows. But Elvis wasn't finished. He nodded to the band, and the music came back, soft, slower than before. The bass line rolled under a light tap of cymbals. Elvis took a step closer to the edge of the stage. "Stay right here with me a minute," he told the miner, the mic still hot so everyone could hear it. The miner gave a small nod. He didn't smile, didn't break eye contact, just stood there, framed in the light. The scarf catching on the draft from the stage fans. Elvis adjusted the mic stand, lowering it slightly so it pointed between them both. The audience quieted. Again, sensing something personal was about to unfold. People in the higher seats leaned forward. Cameras in the press row readjusted their lenses, some focusing tight on the scarf, others on the miner's weathered hands. The oar still sat on the edge of the stage, the twine and paper crumpled beside it. Stage hands stayed frozen in the wings, watching. Even the ushers in the aisles stopped scanning tickets. The air felt charged. Like everyone there knew they were standing at the edge of a story they'd tell years later. Elvis gave a small nod. To the band, then to the miner. The soft guitar strum hung in the air, unresolved. Elvis stepped in closer, his voice just above a whisper into the mic. "Let's sing a little something together." The first notes rang out, and the crowd leaned forward as one. The first chord shimmered through the speakers. Elvis turned to the miner and gave a nod only he could see, the familiar melody of Can't Help Falling in Love floated into the arena, softer than usual. The band held back, leaving room for the moment to breathe. Elvis's voice came in low, steady, almost like he was singing to just one person. The miner stood still, his hands brushing against the silk scarf now hanging from his neck. His lips moved faintly, not quite forming the words, but caught in the rhythm. Elvis took a single step toward him, closing the gap. Their eyes locked. Without breaking the song, Elvis reached out his left hand. The miner's right hand rose, slow and uncertain, until their palms met. The contrast was striking Elvis's. Fingers adorned with gold and diamonds, the miner's thick-knuckled, calloused from decades of gripping tools in the dark. A camera flash lit the moment in stark white for an instant. The crowd began singing softly, almost instinctively, like they knew they were part of something sacred. Rows of strangers swayed together, their voices weaving around Elvis's halfway. Through the verse, Elvis leaned in, bringing the mic closer to the miner's lips. The old man didn't sing, but the way he breathed, in the way his chest rose and fell in time with the music, said enough. Elvis smiled faintly, like he understood. He kept singing, letting the words stretch and linger. "Take my hand, take my whole life too." The arena felt smaller now, as if the walls had drawn in. The bright stage lights seemed to fade at the edges, leaving only the two men in focus at the final line. Elvis held the note longer than usual, his voice carrying warmth instead of power. When it ended, he stepped forward and wrapped the miner in a full embrace. Not a quick stage hug, real one. 10 seconds, maybe more. The crowd roared, but it was almost background noise. In the hug, Elvis's mouth moved, saying something directly into the miner's ear. No microphone, no cameras close enough to catch it. Just words meant for one man. When they pulled apart, the miner's eyes were wet. He blinked rapidly, looking down at the stage floor for a moment before glancing back up at Elvis with a slight nod. Elvis gave the scarf a quick tug to center it on the miner's shoulders, then turned back to the audience, lifting his arms to soak in the applause. But for a heartbeat, his gaze went back to the man in the cap, as if making sure he was still there. The band transitioned into the next song, the tempo picking up, but the front rows stayed locked on the miner, some even reaching out to touch the scarf as he passed back to his seat. Days later, the miner's family would reveal what Elvis whispered in that embrace, and it would turn this into a story no one in Deadwood ever forgot. 3 days later, the story of that night was already making the rounds in Deadwood, but one detail hadn't been told yet: the words Elvis spoke in that long embrace. According to the miner's daughter, her father came home late that night, still wearing the scarf. He didn't take it off when he sat down at the kitchen table. She said he just rested his hands on it, as if afraid it might vanish. When she asked what Elvis had said, he paused, eyes fixed on the wood grain of the table. Then he repeated it slowly. "You've worked harder than I ever have. This is yours." Her father reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small black velvet box. The family hadn't seen him receive it, no one in the crowd had. Inside, nestled against the fabric, was a TCB ringgold lightning bolt. The 3 letters standing for taking care of business. Elvis's personal motto. The miner turned the ring over in his palm. It was heavy, warmer than the gold or he had given away. According to his daughter, he slid it on his finger just once, holding it up to the kitchen light before setting it gently back in the box. He never wore it again. Instead, the box found a place on the mantel, right beside an old brass miner's lamp. Friends who visited would ask to see it, and he'd oblige, but only if they wanted to hear the story from the beginning. In the days after the show, letters came in from old mining buddies. Some had seen him on TV. Local news had aired grainy footage of Elvis placing the scarf around his neck. Others had only heard the retelling in bars and coffee shops, where the story picked up little flourishes each time. But for the miner, the moment was untouched. It was exactly as it happened. A man who spent his life deep underground had been called forward into the light, and given something no paycheck could buy. He thought that was the end of it. 1 week later, the mailman knocked at the miner's door. In his hands was a thick, cream-colored envelope with the return address stamped in bold. Graceland. The miner brought it to the kitchen table before opening it, running his finger along the sealed flap. His daughter sat across from him, watching. Inside was a folded piece of paper and something else flat, rigid. The note was short, written in blue ink. "You'll always have a seat in the front row." Elvis. Beneath it were 2 lifetime passes to Elvis Presley concerts, embossed with the TCB logo. The miner stared at them for a long moment. He had no way of knowing then that he'd never get the chance to use them. The passes sat untouched on the kitchen table when the news came just 2 months later. Elvis Presley was gone. It was August 16, 1977. The miner's daughter remembered the sound of the TV newscaster's voice breaking, the words almost too strange to believe. In their small Deadwood home, the scarf still hung over the chair where he had left it after the concert. The gold all remained on the mantel, and the TCB ring was still tucked away in its black velvet box. The miner picked up the lifetime passes, reading the embossed lettering again. The words now felt heavy, like a promise that could never be fulfilled. According to friends, he didn't say much that day. Just set the passes gently back in their envelope and slid it into the wooden display case with the other treasures from that night. Over time, the display became almost like a shrine. The gold all on one side, the scarf carefully folded on the other. The envelope from Graceland resting between them. Visitors were always drawn to it. And when they asked, the miner would tell the story not about the music, not even about the concert itself, but about a man who stopped a show for him. Local papers picked up the story. At the annual Deadwood Miners reunion, people would nudge each other when he walked in. "That's him, the one Elvis gave the ring to." He'd smile politely, but never let the tale get bigger than it was. He insisted it was simple. One man showing kindness to another. Years passed. The scarf's white silk yellowed slightly with age. The gold all kept its gleam. The miner never tried to sell the ring or the passes, despite more than one offer from collectors. He said they weren't things you owned, they were moments you kept. In the late 80s, a local historical society asked if they could display the items during a special Elvis tribute weekend. He agreed, but only if he could stand by the case and tell people the real story. He'd describe the exact sound of Elvis's voice when he said, "Stay right here with me a minute." He'd show how Elvis draped the scarf, and, if someone was really listening, he'd lean in and repeat the line Elvis had whispered in the hug. "You've worked harder than I ever have." By the time the miner passed away, the story had been told so many times it was part of Deadwood's folklore. His family kept the display intact, placing it in a local museum where it still stands today. People come from miles away to see it. Some leave with tears in their eyes, not because they met Elvis, but because they feel like they met the kind of man who would stop everything to honor a stranger. It proved that no matter how big the stage or how bright the lights, kindness is the thing people remember. If this moved you, share it with someone who believes real kindness can stop a room. What's the smallest act of generosity you've ever seen change someone's life?